Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's India's Supreme Court has ordered Narendra Modi's government to restore normal life in occupied Kashmir. Hearing pleas against the revocation of Kashmir's special status, the top court said India's national interests must take priority during the restoration process. More in this report.
Indian-occupied Kashmir has been under strict lockdown for over 40 days. Indian officials say more than 1,000 people are still detained without due process. Now, the Indian Supreme Court has called for the restoration of transportation and healthcare facilities in the occupied valley.
Our writ petition, the IA in that a demand had been made related to transportation and healthcare facilities. The Honorable Supreme Court has given this order that majority of transport facilities should be increased for the people of Kashmir, and the people should also get all healthcare facilities.
Chief Justice Rajan Gogoi says he will visit the Jammu and Kashmir High Court to evaluate the situation on the ground. The court also allowed opposition leader Ghulam Nabi Azad to visit occupied Kashmir.
Whatever report I get, I will present it before the Supreme Court, and maybe they will be able to tell the government that if those people could be provided with food, then it will be very good.
Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India stands divided after this verdict. Talking to the media, he said the Indian top court's verdict aligns with Pakistan's stance on the Kashmir situation. Meanwhile, former Chief Minister of Indian-occupied Kashmir, Farooq Abdullah, has been arrested under the controversial Public Safety Act.
Indian troops have killed 3 unarmed Kashmiris in the occupied valley amid the ongoing lockdown. Occupation forces killed 2 men during a cordon and search operation in the Kathua district. The 3rd victim was killed in Jammu city. The Kashmiri media says the first 2 died in an encounter staged by Indian occupation forces, while the 3rd was tortured to death by Indian police. Meanwhile, the Welfare Party of India says 40,000 Kashmiris have been arrested since the 5th of August, when India revoked the valley's special status. Indian officials say more than 200 civilians have been injured by occupation forces during the demonstrations. The officials revealed that Srinagar, Baramulla and Pulwama districts have been the focal points for protests. They said 92 Kashmiris have been shot and wounded over the last 2 weeks. Amnesty International has demanded that the Indian government stop silencing the people of Kashmir. Now, the Saudi-led coalition says initial findings show Iranian weapons were used in attacks on Saudi oil plants on Saturday. Iran has already denied the accusation that it's behind the attacks. Coalition spokesman Colonel Turki al-Malki said the initial probe revealed that the attacks did not originate from Yemen. Malki said investigations are underway to determine the origin of the attack. He said the act aimed to target the global economy and not Saudi Arabia. The spokesman said Saudi Arabia is capable of protecting its energy and economic sites. Well, President Donald Trump says the US is locked and loaded for a response to attacks on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities. He also authorized the use of the United States emergency oil stockpile to ensure oil continues to flow after strikes closed 5% of world's global crude oil production. President Trump says there is a reason to believe that the US knows the perpetrators of the attack. Rather than retaliate immediately, the president says he wants to learn the identity of the attackers from Saudi Arabia. Trump rejected report that he's still willing to meet Iran's President Hassan Rouhani unconditionally. Meanwhile, China calls it irresponsible to blame anyone for the attack without conclusive evidence. Speaking in Beijing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Xiangwing appealed for calm and restraint. Russia also appealed for the international community to avoid any hasty steps. The Russian Foreign Ministry said it will be counterproductive to increase tensions around Iran. Well, for more on this story, we're joined by political analyst James Dorsey, who's in Singapore. James, thank you for being with us here on Indus. So the rhetoric out of Washington and Tehran has quickly turned into a reprisal of attacks. Do you think we're close to an armed conflict here?
Well, I think what you're going to see is that once the Americans and the Saudis have clearly established for themselves who they think was responsible for this and have some degree of evidence to back that up, you're going to see pressure, first of all, on the European Union to be more supportive of U.S. sanctions against Iran. The Chinese, the Russians clearly are going to oppose military action, but they're not the ones that are going to decide it. I don't think that either the Americans or the Saudis are going to look to the United Nations Security Council for approval of any military operation.
James, you mentioned the UN Security Council. How do you see the other permanent members of the Council reacting to the prospect of a military escalation?
Still wait and see. As a matter of principle, none of the parties, Iran, the United States, or Saudi Arabia, want a full-fledged war. On the other hand, of course, this attack cannot go without a response. I think what you're seeing in terms of President Trump saying he's waiting for verification, you've had the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo already say that he believes that Iran is responsible, but no evidence was provided for that. So the Saudis, in their investigation, are going to have to come up with evidence of who really was responsible for this and whether it was the Iranians or the Houthis in Yemen.
James Dorsey, thank you very much for your analysis. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Hamid Reza Ghulamzadeh, who's a political analyst from Tehran. Hamid, thank you for being with us here on Indus News. So Trump said that the US is locked and loaded. Is the Iranian government ready for an attack?
There is not going to be any war actually, but if there is, in case of any war, an attack, yes, of course, Iran is ready. Iran has proved to be ready just a while ago when a spy drone of the United States intruded the Iranian airspace and it was downed by the defense system. And we know that it was a native one, so Iran is capable of defending itself, and it is very serious actually in defending its territorial integrity. So Iran doesn't seem to be worried about any intrusions or any wars or attacks. And I do believe that there is not going to be any. But in case of any war, yeah, Iran is prepared to defend it seriously and completely.
Hamid, you say Iran's ready, but what about the public? Do you think the sentiment in Iran is against US President Donald Trump's latest remarks about being locked and loaded?
No, Iranians are more making fun of them right now because they actually believe in the capability of the Iranian army and defense capabilities, and on the other hand, they have seen the recent events, and let's say they have a good historical memory. They have seen Iran fighting 8 years against the whole world, against Saddam, and they didn't actually give up, and they could win the war. And they have seen all the difficulties. They have been under so-called maximum pressure sanctions for 40 years. I personally remember for American presidents saying that they are imposing most crippling sanctions on Iran, and Iran is not crippled.
Hamid Raza, thank you for joining us on Indus News. That was Hamid Raza Ghulamzadeh, a political analyst in Tehran. Well, I'll be back with more news from around the world after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News. Now, international oil prices have left by 8% after drone attacks on Aramco facilities halved Saudi's oil production. Crude futures reached their highest level since May, but have steadied after the US said it will release its own strategic oil reserves. Driven by fears that the US could attack Iran in response to the drone strikes, investors have piled into safe havens. They've lifted gold prices by nearly 1%, while silver has climbed almost by 2%. Iran says it's ready to work for peace in Yemen with the UN and regional countries. Government spokesperson Ali Rabi says Tehran is willing to cooperate for stability in the region. Meanwhile, Yemen's Houthi rebels have said Saudi Aramco's oil processing plants are still a target and could be attacked at any moment. Houthi spokesperson Yahya Saree said the Saudi-led coalition should stop its aggression in Yemen and lift its blockade. He warned foreigners to leave the kingdom's oil-producing areas to avoid becoming collateral damage in the next raid. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have seized a vessel in the Persian Gulf for allegedly smuggling 250,000 litres of diesel to the United Arab Emirates. Iran's state media reports the ship was detained near Iran's Greater Tum Island. It says the crew has been handed over to authorities in the southern Hormuzgan province. Tensions between Iran and US allies in the Middle East have spiked since Washington imposed economic sanctions on Tehran and withdrew from the deal of 2015. In July, Britain seized an Iranian tanker near Gibraltar, accusing it of carrying oil to Syria in violation of EU sanctions. In retaliation, Iran seized a British-flagged tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he can strike a Brexit deal in the next few weeks. In an interview, Johnson expressed optimism that he could reach a final agreement before an EU summit on the 17th of October. The UK's Prime Minister reiterated his vow to take the UK out of the EU by the 31st October deadline, with or without a deal. Johnson will meet European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and the EU's Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier today. The meeting in Luxembourg will see Johnson undertake his first Brexit negotiations since becoming Prime Minister in July. Ahead of talks, Johnson said the next few days will be key to his chances of securing an amended Brexit deal. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab also reiterated the UK's demand to remove the Irish backstop.
We've been very clear on the approach, and the Prime Minister will reaffirm those with Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier today, which is we want to remove the anti-democratic backstop. We've set forward a range of technical proposals how we would do that.
In Ankara, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a bilateral meeting ahead of the fifth round of peace talks about Syria. Earlier, Erdogan met Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. During the meeting, the two leaders discussed regional peace. Erdogan is hosting the Russian and Iranian presidents for their latest rounds of talks on Syria. The summit will focus on Damascus's push on the last rebel-held location of Idlib. Turkey is primarily concerned by the steady advance of Syrian forces into the region, backed by Russian air power, despite a series of ceasefires. Now, two anti-establishment candidates have claimed victory with the unofficial results of Tunisia's presidential elections. A 61-year-old law professor, Kais Said, says he's in pole position. Abdel Fattah Moro comes in at a close second, while jailed media mogul Nabil Karoui also claims he's qualified for the second round. The Election Commission reported a relatively low turnout at 45%, down from 64% in the last elections of 2014. Official results will be announced tomorrow. A runoff vote will be held in November if nobody secures an absolute majority. The death of President Beji Said Essebsi in July forced the elections to be held 3 months earlier than planned. Parliamentary elections are scheduled to take place in October. The Libyan government accuses Khalifa Haftar's eastern forces of killing dozens of civilians in the city of Tarhuna. In a statement, the government condemned what it calls crimes against the people of the city. It demands the international community and UN Security Council immediately work to stop such violations. Tarhuna is 90 kilometers south of Tripoli and controlled by Khalifa Haftar's LNA forces. The fighting in Tarhuna escalated after the GNA Air Force claimed it killed 3 senior LNA commanders in airstrikes there. Haftar's forces launched their renewed bid called Operation Dignity to capture the capital Tripoli last week. 36 people are feared dead after a boat on the Congo River sank near the capital Kinshasa. Police say 76 out of 102 passengers on board have been rescued. The whaleboat was travelling from Kinshasa from the Mai Ndombe province when it capsized 100 kilometers from the capital. Police say a rescue operation and investigation are still underway. Lake and river transport is widely used in the Democratic Republic of Congo because of its poor highways. In the vast majority of accidents, passengers are not equipped with life jackets and many cannot swim. Now, in other news, over 30,000 cyclists have taken part in a mass bike ride in Russia's capital, Moscow. The ride was organized in a bid to promote cycling in the city, which is home to more than 3 million bicycles. More in this report.
On a warm autumn day, riders heading for the cycling festival arrived in the city centre early in the morning. Some came dressed in uniforms, brought instruments and took their children along. Muscovites have taken to the bicycle for a range of reasons, but for many it's a way of avoiding Moscow's notoriously tough traffic.
The weather is good, the spirits are high, so we decided to raise mood for everyone, ourselves included.
The event marks 8 years since the city's first cycling track was created. Cycling has become increasingly popular in Moscow as more protected bike lanes have been laid down in recent years.
Hello and welcome back. Now, in business news, Britain's Trade Minister Liz Truss says striking a trade deal with New Zealand will be a priority for the UK after Brexit. Truss has arrived in Wellington for talks with her counterpart David Parker today. Truss's three-nation tour also includes Australia and Japan. It's aimed at preparing for trade negotiations after Brexit. Truss said the UK is ready to start working out the details of negotiations with New Zealand. She said signing an independent trade deal after leaving the bloc is vital for the UK.
We're going to be leaving the European Union on the 31st of October, with or without a deal. And as part of that agenda, striking trade deals much more broadly than we have been doing is going to be vitally important. The UK is going to have its first independent trade policy for the first time in 45 years.
Well, around 50,000 workers have begun a strike at America's biggest car maker, General Motors. The United Auto Workers Union walked out after failing to reach an agreement over pay and conditions with the manufacturers. About 200 plant-level union leaders voted unanimously in favor of a strike. One of the biggest sticking points is GM's decision to close 4 car assembly plants in the United States. This is the first major stoppage at GM since 2007. Most European stock markets have lost 0.5% or more in early trading. London's FTSE and DAX indexes have declined significantly. Asia's financial markets have closed mixed amid the turmoil. The Hang Seng Index lost 1% after another weekend of unrest in Hong Kong. The Shanghai Composite was flat after China reported a further slowdown in industrial production and retail sales. Well, it's 29 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but I'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Bye-bye.